Okay, good day everyone. This is John Marco Abuso speaking, your reporter, and my topic will be about the critic. And I am here also to discuss my earlier critique in speech hacks. Number 1. How universal are speech hack categories? All languages and culture have speech hacks, but they may not be the same. As Wiersbika in 1987 points out that Aboriginal languages do not have verbs that correspond to thank and apologize, but they have verbs for speech acts which have no names in English. So, on the other hand, Polish has two verbs which correspond roughly to English promise, but neither of which means exactly the same thing. As Himes in 1962 claimed that the names of its repertoire of speech acts encode the culture's view of its most relevant forms of talk. And this view would seem to lend support to the idea of learning English based upon its set of speech act verbs. Next, how many speech acts are there? If we take number of performative verbs in English as indicative of the number of speech acts, then readers will recall that estimated there to be somewhere between 1 and 10,000 performatives, as Austin in 1962 states. And according to Wiersbika's in 1987 dictionary of speech act verbs contains just 231 entries, but this is not a comprehensive list. And similarly, based on a survey of the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English of when in 2007, estimated there to be 230 speech act verbs in English. And this must be an underestimation, however, and is probably due to the fact that the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English is a learner's dictionary. And according also to Gozzi in 1991, based on a supplement to Webster's third and abridged dictionary, calculated that there were 75 new speech act verbs added to English in just one quarter century, from 1961 to 1986. Next, the contrast between specific and diffuse acts. As the Bew Grande and Dressler in 1981 point out that there is a great difference between what they call relatively well-defined speech acts such as promising or threatening and extremely diffuse speech acts such as stating, asserting, and questioning. Then, however, the conditions pertaining for the performance of the more diffuse acts are not specificable. In the same way, those for well-defined acts such as promising or threatening. And for this reason, no doubt most of the work on individual speech acts is limited to the relatively narrow range of the more easily definable acts such as requests, apologies, compliments, thanking, and so forth. What this means for the application is that speech act theory is that a large part of what people actually do with language in performing the more diffuse acts is not susceptible to analysis in terms of speech acts. Next, the size of speech act realization forms. All the writers on speech act acknowledge that the formal manifestation of a speech act does not necessarily correspond to the single sentence. There is nevertheless a tendency to take the sentence as the standard speech act unit. A single act can be realized by less than a sentence. For example, agreement can be expressed by a simple yes or more than one sentences. For example, a promise in the form of a formal oath might take many sentences. On the other hand, one sentence can express more than one act. Thus, a student who asks the teachers, "Would you speak more slowly, please?" or simultaneous requesting action, asserting that the teacher speaks too quickly. And obviously, as far as application of speech act theory is concerned, and this question of size is a serious one. Next, discrete categories versus scale of meaning. As was pointed out earlier by Austin in 1962, based his estimate of the number of speech acts on the number of performative verbs in English, he thus assumed that speech acts and performative verbs are in a one-to-one relationship. And this assumption has been criticized by Leach in 1981 to 1983 and others author, specifically Edmondson, on the grounds that there is no reason to believe that distinction made in our vocabulary necessarily exists in reality. The next, empirical versus introspective data. We have reviewed the advantages and disadvantages of how to collect speech act data above. Ideally, we would want to base a syllabus on the most authentic data we could find. As Boxer and Pickering stated, the teaching of speech act should first and foremost be based on spontaneous speech in order to capture the underlying social strategy of the speech behavior. And the teaching of speech act should first and foremost be based on the spontaneous speech. This approach has been made much easier with the advent of easily searchable electronic corpora, or a number of studies have used corpora to investigate speech act behavior. Now let's proceed to Grandi's critique. Much more recent than my critique of speech act approaches to pedagogy. As summarized above is one by Grandi in 2012. In a review of Ishihara and Cohen in 2010, Grandi's conclusion is that Ishihara and Cohen's book uses native speaker pragmatic norms as a way of determining a socio-culturally inspired learn in order to use language teaching. And the first critique of Grandi is teaching and learning pragmatics accepts the concept of intrinsic cultural difference, in which foreign language learners find themselves at cross-cultural variance with native speakers. And then the second critique, contexts are presumptive and prescribed appropriate linguistic routines. Then the third one, appropriate linguistic routines are best characterized as speech acts whose form is revealed through dicities which enable modal utterances to be determined. The fourth one, modal utterances can be presented to learners as targets and discussed metalinguistically. And the last one, explicit metapragmatic awareness and declarative knowledge are crucial to the development of second language pragmatic competence. Now let's proceed to the application to pedagogy. The discussion throughout this chapter has been within a context of pedagogic application. Okay, in this section, it will focus on some general principles for a pedagogical approach to speech acts. Clearly, there is a need to go beyond the simplistic matching of communicative functions, or the speech acts, with social context and realization forms. There is a need to develop awareness of the subtitles of context in affecting socio-pragmatic and linguistic choice and meaning. This means a more consciousness raising approach rather than memorization of socio-pragmatic and pragmalinguistic norms. Now, this is the questions for discussions. First one. Say if the verbs in the following utterances are performatives or not. Number one, you are reminded not to smoke in this office. I suggest you come back tomorrow. Number three, I declare this conference open. Number four, I can't ask him to do it again. Number four, I love you. Number six, the room is cooled by the air conditioner. The second, the following is ambiguous regarding its status as a performative, and it explains why. And the phrase, I bet $50 on that horse. Number 3. Think of possible language forms for realizing the following speech acts: the identify, agree, apologize, request, and attract attention. Number 4. Look again at the range of possibilities for complaining about a meal in a restaurant in section 5.7. It writes down a set of realization patterns like this for asking someone out on a date or borrowing some money from a friend. And that would be all.